Frank, I was reading the earlier sections of your book yesterday, and I thought we should start by asking you about your early childhood and your memories of Germany. There's one particular story that you tell about your memory of being in school in, I think, was it 1935, which is amazing to read as a historian, with the teacher making those strongly anti-Semitic remarks and your response to that. I wondered if you might be able to tell us a bit more about those early memories of Germany in the 1930s.
Well, I ought to tell you something for a start. My memory of early childhood is not as good as most English authors. When you read English literature, people seem to remember everything that happened to them after they were 3.5. I have patches and scenes, but I don't remember the whole thing on a continuous basis. Would you like to shut that door? But I do remember that particular scene, and I can still actually visualize the classroom and the children and the teacher, and the look of horror on the face of the teacher when I protested that not all Jews were bad, and my grandfather was particularly good. And they all tried to sort of hush it up, but in fact it all got out, and the poor headmaster who tried to protect me got sacked, and I had to leave the school. But what happened after that, I don't remember, except we had a very beautiful apartment in a part of Berlin called, this is where my men is beginning to go, in a part of Berlin called Herrmann Freistraße. I haven't got the exact memory. And lying in the front bedroom was my very ancient great-grandmother, who had been blind for much of her life, or the tail end of her life, and she had just been operated on for cataract, which was a new thing, and she was lying there. I think she was 84 at the time, and I used to turn up every morning and chat to her. I can remember precisely seeing her in bed and the sort of sunlight coming in the morning. Now those are the sort of things I can remember. If that's helpful, I don't know.
It's very helpful. I mean, it's a wonderful, vivid memory of those moments, which I think is so powerful. You must have grown up when you were a very small boy with a lot of family around you then.
I don't remember that at all, no. I hardly remember my parents' presence in this apartment, except it was on a top floor, and there was a very big sort of garden veranda at the top, and it was big enough for me to go around on a scooter. And there were many accidents. But curious enough, I had no recall of my parents at that stage. And then, if you remember, they started planning their departure to England. And really, there was a sort of gap until I got to Switzerland. And I enjoyed Switzerland. We were staying in a sort of children's home, which was good for my asthma. I don't particularly remember having asthma, but my brother and I were left alone while my parents prepared their exodus from Germany, which also meant that they had to pay huge fines to be allowed to get out. And all I know in general is was that my father had to buy a farm in southwest Africa and transfer his money there so it wouldn't all be taken from him. And I still have all the files, but they fill me with gloom when I read them, so on the whole I don't. And Switzerland, I was there with my brother, we shared a room, and the biggest event of our presence there were two things. One is we had ping pong bats, and my brother wanted one, and I threw it over to him, and it hit him on the forehead and left a scar. So he always thought I did it on purpose, but of course I hadn't. And the other thing was that we learned skiing and tobogganing. I'm not sure about skating. I don't remember skating much. But there's a very big hotel beneath the children's home where we were, called the Souvretta Hotel, which is still there. And on one particular occasion, the King of Egypt and all his sisters took over one floor. And of course they weren't any good at skiing. And they all went on the road, and each of the sisters was supported by two skiing teachers. And my brother and I were sitting on a toboggan, going at a good lick, and we couldn't stop when we shouted, they should get out of the way. So we knocked over two of the Egyptian princesses and carried on out to the nearest village. And then I remember being driven across Europe by the man who ran the children's home and the sort of matron. And for all I know, they were sort of an item. And we drove through part of France where the Maginot Line was. And I remember vividly the man who owned the children's home saying, "Look at that, boys, that's the Maginot Line. That'll stop the Germans whenever there's another war." And then after that, sort of memories of that part of my life fade, and I started in England. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how aware do you think you were at that stage of what was going on in Germany and in Europe as a whole?
No, not really.
Yeah.
In Switzerland we were entirely kept away from it, and my parents wrote to me quite frequently, but that sort of thing wasn't mentioned. But it was a strange time because my grandparents, who were also in theory, my mother's parents, were in theory Jewish, but not by religion, but by background. And we have got the entire correspondence and diaries which my grandmother kept, because my grandfather was already too old to cope with it, and she negotiated with the Nazi authorities herself personally, who'd never done anything more except fixing the menu for Sunday lunch. And she carried on for 2 years and got it all organised until they were able to leave Germany as well. And my grandfather was known for the fact saying, "I've never hurt these people, why should they hurt me?" But it was borne unto him that things weren't as simple as